At 28, you married for passion. At 38, you stayed for the children. At 48, maybe you mourned a loss. Or walked away from years that no longer felt like home, but now, at 60. Or 65. Maybe even 72, you find yourself looking at love again, and you ask the question, can someone really start over? When most of the world believes your story is already written. The truth is, love after 60 is not a continuation, it's not a rerun, it's a second sunrise, soft, radiant, and entirely its own, because this time, you're not chasing butterflies, you're not building empires, you're not rushing to find someone who will complete you. This time, you want someone who can sit in your silence. Someone who sees the beauty in your wrinkles, not in spite of them, someone who doesn't want to change you, because they know what it means to have been changed by life already. But here's the honest truth, falling in love after 60 is a different language, and too often, we're trying to speak the words of our youth, in a season that now demands wisdom, not infatuation. That's why so many second marriages fail, not because we don't love, but because we bring yesterday's expectations into today's heart. We think the formula for happiness at 25 is still true at 65, but it's not, it's deeper now, slower, more sacred, and so this is not just a video about remarriage, this is a mirror held up to the souls who have lived, who have loved, and who are now wondering, is it foolish to believe in love again? Or is it the wisest thing I could do? In this journey, we'll uncover the 5 hidden truths that no one tells you about getting married again after 60, not just the emotional truths, not just the financial ones, but the spiritual, human truths that could mean the difference between another heartbreak and a love that finally feels like home, because this time, it's not about romance, it's about resonance. So take a deep breath, and open your heart, not to who you were, but to who you've finally become. That's the first truth you must accept, before saying I do again, and know, that change isn't something to fix, it's not something to grieve, it's something to honor. You see, the world often tells us that aging is a slow decline, that it's about losing things, beauty, energy, relevance. But what if that's the wrong story? What if, instead of fading, you're distilling, like wine in an oak barrel, like wisdom carved into wood, like the final brushstrokes of a masterpiece? You're not less than who you were, you're just more concentrated. The woman who used to cry over being misunderstood, has now learned how to sit in silence, and find peace in her own company. The man who once sought validation through ambition, has now realized that presence is the real legacy he leaves behind. So no, you are not who you were at 30, and thank God for that, because the person you are now, knows how to say no without guilt, knows that solitude isn't loneliness, it's clarity, knows that a partner doesn't have to rescue you, because you're not drowning anymore. Let's be honest, in your 20s, love was fireworks, explosive, beautiful, but just as quickly, it vanished into smoke. Now, love is a fireplace, warm, steady, safe, and built with intention. So before you say I do again, ask yourself, am I trying to relive an old story? Or, am I finally ready to write a new one? Because remarriage after 60 isn't about recapturing youth, it's about celebrating evolution. And the person who falls in love with you now, will not be falling in love with your body at its prime, but with your soul at its truest form. You are not who you were, and that's not just okay, that's your power. We don't like to talk about it, we want love to feel sacred, pure, like something untouched by the dust of money and math. But if you're thinking about remarrying after 60, you can't ignore the ledger. Let me ask you this, when was the last time you sat across from someone you loved, and spoke honestly about money, not just what's in your account, but where you're vulnerable, what you fear, and how? At this stage in life, money is no longer just numbers, it's memories, it's protection, it's your legacy. You see, by 60, most people have been through something, a bankruptcy, a divorce, a business lost, or worse, a spouse lost, and everything that came with them. And when two people come together later in life, they're not just blending hopes, they're blending histories, and sometimes they're blending debts. Financial intimacy becomes just as important, if not more, than physical intimacy, because here's the uncomfortable truth: love doesn't pay medical bills, love doesn't solve estate disputes, love won't make your grown children less worried about the family inheritance. So before you say "I do" again, you need to ask, what do I owe, what do I own, who do I still support, and how do I want to be taken care of? If I can no longer care for myself, these are not unromantic questions, these are adult questions, because love, in this season of life, must walk hand in hand with reality, or it will stumble into resentment. If you're scared to bring up money, ask yourself why. Is it shame, guilt, or a fear that talking about the practical will kill the magic? But real magic isn't fragile, it doesn't break under truth, it thrives in it. So before you walk back down that aisle, make sure your finances are not just clear, but aligned, because two hearts might fall in love, but it's the shared vision of security that helps them stay. In our youth, love is about bodies, touch, attraction, the spark that ignites with just a glance, but after 60, love begins to mean something else entirely. It becomes the sound of a pill bottle opening at dawn, the quiet shuffle of slippers in the hallway at 3 a.m., the gentle question whispered across wrinkled hands, "Did you remember to take your blood pressure meds?" Because after 60, love is no longer separate from health, it is woven into it. When you say "I do" at this age, you are not just marrying a person, you are entering a contract with their biology, their diagnoses, and their uncertainties. Arthritis, diabetes, a hip replacement, a history of stroke. Or perhaps early signs of dementia. These are not future fears, for many, they are present companions, and the vow, in sickness and in health, becomes more than just words spoken in a ceremony, it becomes the lived experience, day by day, it becomes waiting outside a doctor's office, navigating Medicare paperwork, and learning how to support someone who may no longer move, remember, or function the way they once did. In this vulnerability, there is an intimacy that young lovers may never know. When someone helps you steady your hands to sip tea, when they know which knee aches before you speak, when they read your medical chart not out of duty, but out of devotion. That is not weakness, that is sacred loyalty, but let's not romanticize everything. Because the truth is, sometimes, love after 60 means watching the person you adore fade slowly, and there is grief in that. There are hard choices, days of exhaustion, nights where you wonder if you're more nurse than partner. So before you commit to love again, you must ask, am I prepared not just to love them, but to care for them? And even deeper, will they care for me, if it is I who weakens first? Because here's the truth no one likes to say out loud, your health is no longer just yours. If you remarry, it becomes shared terrain, a journey with 2 feet, even if one is limping. So choose someone who doesn't flinch at discomfort, someone who doesn't disappear when things get messy. Choose someone who sees your prescriptions, your scars, your medical appointments, and still says, I'm here. Let's face it together. Because after 60, love is not just a feeling, it is a commitment to walk slowly, carefully, and faithfully, through whatever terrain your bodies must face. They say marriage is between 2 people, but when you're over 60, that's rarely ever true, because behind your new partner's eyes, there are stories, behind their smile, there may be ex-spouses, adult children, grandchildren, even a beloved dog that still sleeps on their side of the bed, and you carry your own caravan of people, too, children who are just checking in, a daughter who raises one eyebrow when you mention their name, a friend who whispers, are you sure you're doing the right thing? You see, remarrying after 60 is not a duet, it's a full choir. Some sing harmony, some sing off-key, and some don't want to sing at all. Your children may say they're happy for you, but inside, they're calculating, will she inherit dad's house? Will his new wife make decisions about mom's care? And sometimes, they don't ask these things out loud, they act it out in passive resistance, missed visits, awkward silences, or the sudden need to protect the family assets. Let's be honest, after 60, no one walks into love as a blank slate, you come with decades of memories, and so does your new partner. There may be a spouse who passed, and still lingers in framed photos on the hallway wall. There may be a divorce that left behind emotional scar tissue. No, I can see. You may even carry your own guilt. Will my kids think I'm replacing their mother? Will his grown daughter ever accept me? But here's the gentle truth: you are not asking for approval, you are asking for understanding, and in time, even resistance can soften when love is steady. The key: transparency. Talk to your children, not to ask permission, but to offer inclusion. Invite their opinions, not to let them control your life, but to help them feel respected in it, because they are not losing you, they are learning to share you in a new chapter. And as for your new partner's family, walk gently, respect the old bonds, don't try to compete with a memory. You are not here to replace anyone, you are here to bring light into what remains. And if an ex-spouse is still in the picture, well, welcome to the real theater of remarriage. Learn the script, don't improvise with jealousy. Boundaries, respect, and grace, these are your tools. Remember, this chapter of life is not about domination. It's about coexistence. You are not building from scratch, you are building on history. So choose gentle strength, let love be your compass, but wisdom be your map, because remarriage after 60 isn't just about falling in love again, it's about rising in maturity, to love not just one person, but everything that person brings with them. It usually starts with silence, the kind that sits in the room after the TV turns off, the kind that echoes through the hallway where laughter used to live. One cup of coffee in the morning, one plate at the dinner table, and one voice talking back. Only inside your head. It's the sound of loneliness, a quiet shadow that follows many people after 60, especially those who've lost a partner, or lived for years in relationships that no longer felt like home. Here's a truth we don't say out loud often enough: loneliness can make smart people do desperate things. And yes, it can make you say yes to someone you barely know, simply because they showed up, because they smiled, because they sat across from you and asked, "So, do you live alone?" But companionship, true companionship, cannot be built on the fear of being alone. Otherwise, you are not entering a partnership, you are escaping a prison. And one day, you may wake up and find you've just swapped one kind of silence for another. There is a sacred difference between being alone and being lonely. You can live by yourself, and feel full, connected, purposeful, and you can be married, and feel like a ghost inside your own life. So before you say "I do" again, ask yourself, am I looking for someone to fill the chair across from me, or someone who sees the world beside me? Real companionship after 60 is not about fireworks. It's about fireside, not about adrenaline, but about attention, not just someone who makes your heart beat faster, but someone who helps it beat steadier. Ask yourself, can you sit in silence with this person and feel at peace? Can you argue with them and still feel safe? Can you grow beside them, without shrinking who you are? Because after 60, love isn't just about who excites you, it's about who steadies you. Let's be honest, there will be lonely days, whether you're married or not, but the cure for loneliness is not simply another person, it's connection, shared purpose, laughter that comes without performance, a walk with someone who matches your pace, and doesn't rush your story. And if you haven't yet found that, don't settle for the first hand that reaches out, wait for the hand that actually holds you, the one that doesn't just ask for your body, but listens to your soul. You deserve more than just company, you deserve companionship, the kind that sees your wrinkles as poetry, that hears your silence as wisdom, and that walks beside you, not because you were afraid to walk alone, but because you finally chose to walk together. Here we are, at the threshold of a new chapter. Before you say "I do" again, before you step forward with your heart open, with hope and a touch of fear, I want you to pause, and say something even more important first: I know who I am. Because after 60, love isn't a leap into the unknown, it's a choice made from a place of knowing. You carry decades of laughter, tears, wisdom, and scars. You are not the person you were at 30, 40, or even 50. You are the sum of every joy and every heartbreak that shaped you. And that truth is your greatest strength. When you say "I do" at this stage in life, you say it from a place of wholeness, not neediness. You say it because you want to share your abundant self. Not because you feel incomplete without someone else. This self-awareness is a shield and a gift. It lets you set boundaries without guilt. It lets you ask for what you truly need. It lets you recognize red flags that once would have been ignored. And most importantly, it lets you love deeply, without losing yourself. Remember, love after 60 isn't about finding someone to complete you. It's about finding someone to celebrate you. Someone who looks at your story and says, yes, this is the person I want to walk with. And you look back and say, I am ready, I am whole, I am me. So before you say I do again, say I know who I am. Say it with courage, say it with pride, say it with the quiet confidence of a life fully lived, because this is not the start of a new chapter, this is the continuation of a story that only you can write, and this time, you hold the pen. Thank you for joining me on this journey, through love, loss, and the remarkable courage of starting again after 60. May your heart be open, your mind be clear, and your spirit be free. Here's to love that honors who you truly are.